All right, welcome to Bridgepoint Podcast. Coming back at you today with your boy Matthew Peters and
your boy Eli.
Eli, great to have Eli back with us. Today we're going to be talking about a very important subject, which is it okay to worry?
Is it?
Is it okay to worry?
Is it okay to worry?
You know, this is one of the things that I think people need to address because people get so caught up in, is it okay to worry? Is it not okay to worry? And we're going to probably get into some of these things. But just starting us off, what do you think? Is it okay to worry?
I think it depends on the context.
Okay.
For example, can I worry if I'm going to pass my test tomorrow? Yes.
Yeah.
But I also feel like I feel like if worry is getting in the way of, prayer life or anything like that. Am I kind of loud to you? I don't know if I'm loud.
Well, no, being loud is good.
Okay. Just kidding. But if it gets in the way of prayer life, if it gets in the way of maybe just some habitual things that you do, like reading in the morning or anything like that.
Right.
If it's pulling you, I feel like if worry pulls you away from faith, it's not a godly sorrow.
So could we set up some artificial distinctions or just talking points? We're not intending to be sort of, let's say, absolutely precise and accurate.
Right.
But could we set up a spectrum where let's talk about your test, okay? So you got a test tomorrow. My poor daughter, she's taking her driving test. I can remember taking the driving test and everyone saying to me, dude, everybody fails the first time. And so you go into this thing with concern. Okay, so, you studied, and perhaps there are people that are genuinely full of anxiety and just full-blown turbo worry, right, about their test. That's not what we're talking about. I think what you're mentioning is it's an unknown.
Right.
I've done my best.
Yes. And
I've got some general concerns about that, right? So let's put that at the far end. If you're supremely confident, you're totally relaxed, you think this is going to be a 2 + 2 = 4. I'm not going to go in there and accidentally say 5. You know what I mean? Make a mistake, right? Let's put that as concern. Okay. And then maybe somewhere towards the middle would be what we would call garden variety worry. So it's capturing your mind, it's impeding your emotional health.
Yes.
You can't pray as well anymore, or you're starting to obsess over it and spin it around in your head. You play the video of what it's going to look like. You go through the scenarios, that's worry. And then if we could push worry out to a point where it's debilitating or it is consuming most of your life, we could call that anxiety.
I feel like all three are the same thing.
They're varieties of the same, aren't they?
They all stem from the same thing. I think it's just the severity of the situation is what creates one of those three things. Worrying about a driver's test can give you concern.
Right.
You studied for months and months in driver's ed. You hope you don't mess up the parallel park or whatever you guys do up here.
Yeah, everyone messes it up. Right?
Or worry could be, am I good enough for this job interview? Am I there? You know what I mean?
Right.
And anxiety could be God, I haven't heard from you in a while. I feel like, am I doing something wrong?
Right.
Is there something that I could be doing better to hear from you? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I feel like there's a severity differentiation between those words. They all mean the same thing.
Yeah. I think one of the things is that
do you agree? Do you know?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. One of the things that I've found is that I think people are in large part unaware of how much the psychological effects of concern to worry to anxiety are actually playing into their everyday lives. And then when they finally wake up to it and someone says, hey, I think you're really anxious. And they're like, what? I have people say this to me from time to time. I don't realize how concern has turned into worry, has turned into some kind of anxiety.
It's snowballed.
And it's snowballed and it's grown. And I'm not aware of how big it's become in my psyche. And then someone points that out to me, and then I'm like, oh my gosh, am I sinning or something? Because if we look in Scripture again and again, we're told not to worry, right? And I was just reading the other day in the Bible, just straight through the way I normally do, and I came across Paul talking about how he was going to send Timothy and Epaphroditus. And I love these passages about how Paul's going to send Timothy and Epaphroditus. First, I like the bit about Epaphroditus because he was sick almost to death, and everyone's really concerned. And then what I loved, this is a little snarky and off topic, and I think we might have mentioned this in other podcasts, not with you though, Eli. So if automatic supernatural healing was the order of the day, why didn't Paul just pray over Epaphroditus and heal him?
Great question.
Right? And so these branches of spirituality that are coming out now saying that anybody who doesn't believe in supernatural healing on the spot is like somehow sub-Christian, sub-gospel. I have a real hard time with that because the Apostle Paul did in fact heal people, but didn't heal Epaphroditus, evidently, right? And so he says he's going to send Epaphroditus, he's going to send Timothy, and then he says this really curious thing. He says, because I care so much about you guys, and I need to send him to relieve my anxiety and my worries. Whoa. So this is the same guy, okay? This is the same guy that later is going to write the Philippians and say, don't worry about anything. Don't worry about anything, but with thanksgiving, through prayer and petition, present your requests to God, and the peace of Christ will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. If you got anything to think about, think about excellent things. If there's anything excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. So he's kind of given them this kind of way before cognitive therapy has come around and discovered that you can actually, through thought processes, begin to do therapy on your brain, right?
Yeah.
That you can replace negative with positive, and that this actually has a profound impact on your mental health, right? So millennia before the University of Pennsylvania did any research on that, okay, Dr. Burns and his new mood therapy, in case anyone's interested in reading a pop version of it, right? That's not a sell for that. I'm just saying that's out there, right? The Apostle Paul is basically saying, listen, I'm a guy that actually worries. In fact, in other places, I can't recall it off the top of my head, in other places he says, besides, there's all the daily pressures and concerns that I have for all the churches. This is a guy who cared passionately and deeply, and yet he clearly had what we would call today anxiety or worry. Is that okay? How do we handle that?
I think...
I mentioned this because I personally deal with it on a daily basis.
Well, as do I. I take medication for it because I'm not the best at handling it.
Right. So it's we medicate, right? That's an avenue people take. What are some other things that people can do? I mean, I think that there's this anxiety is so high and prevalent today that we as Christians have got to face this thing. One of the things that is concerning to me is that if people say to me, or if I said to you, like, let's say you're anxious about something, let's say you're worrying about something, and then if I come to you and I say, hey, don't worry, now what are you going to do?
Probably do the complete opposite.
Yeah, you're going to, the more pressure we put on people regarding anxiety, it's like you start worrying about worrying. And then you feel bad about it, don't you?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You don't feel bad about it.
No.
I do. I feel bad about it because I don't want to feel that way. And then when the pressure comes, and then I go, well, what am I supposed to do now? Because you fall into these cycles. You know what I mean? And I think that you mentioned something earlier, like what are some of the things that anxiety does to us that are so incredibly unhealthy?
I mean, it definitely takes your center focus away. I mean...
Yeah.
When I had my really bad anxious spouts, when I'm at work or something, it's hard to focus on anything. I mean, we can just talk on a basic level like that.
Right.
I mean, I feel like saying that you're not supposed to have anxiety is such a stupid thing to say because it's inevitable as a human being. If you care for something, 9 times out of 10, you're going to show emotional attachment to something that you care about.
Yeah.
And when you feel like you're losing touch of what you care about, it gives you anxiety. Now, I've had pastors in the past tell me that anxiety is a bad thing to have.
Right.
As a Christian.
Right.
God will get rid of all of it for you. All you got to do is pray about it, and you'll never have it again, I promise you.
It's interesting the accent you put on when you do that.
Quite a hint, nudge, nudge.
Yeah,
but,
right.
I mean, it's hard to think about. It's like, am I doing something wrong, or am I not praying about something? Or am I afraid to bring what I'm anxious about to God? Or do I have this doubt that God could even fix it for me?
Sure, that's huge.
I mean, I'll even go that deep.
Yeah, go there. And I think so much of it is, I think you've really articulated some important features there.
I don't know, I was kind of like scattered there.
No, I thought that was perfectly in line. I mean, that makes perfect sense. It's like, I have these natural attachments, and that's going to cause me to think about that. I would put that more in the concern area.
Well, you have some idols you're not supposed to have.
Well,
idols.
okay. See, now that's the interesting thing. People talk about idolatry. I was raised in a school where idolatry was front and center. I think idolatry is a major spiritual category. You can idolize anything and put that before God, and if you do that, you're in major spiritual and psychological trouble. Right. Okay? But what I find is that those systems where people like to, let's say, they're reductionistic, they want to take everything and package it into a sin issue and an idol issue, right? And I think that's understandable, right? But what happens when you're dealing with someone that has a psychosomatic or a physiological or a component of emotional, you know what I mean? Like, for example, you could take a little child and, a little child might lose their parent when they're very young. I've seen this with adopted children, okay? These adopted kids, they have huge attachment trauma, right? And then they're anxious about everything, okay? And I have firsthand experience of this with multiple different connections with people who are adopted, all right? And these little kids, they can't fall asleep. They are extremely disturbed by the slightest change in their environment, right? All of this stems from trauma that happened to them, probably even before they have cognitive memory. Okay? Like, my earliest memory are before I was 2 years old. People say that's psychologically, developmentally impossible. I got news for them. I had this huge conversation with my sister in town. I said, I remember this, this, and this. Do you remember what the house was? And I described the house that we lived in like when I was about 2 or turning 2, and she did not remember, and I did. And there are not photographs that we're relying on. These are pure memories. Okay? So even
I can't remember back before, like, maybe 4 or 5 years
ago. Most people can't. That's the point. But like that's why I'm saying, like, all of these things happened with these adopted children largely within the first several months of their lives. They don't have formed memories, right? So now they're super anxious when they get older, and then we throw this idol label on them, and we tell them they need to repent of their anxiety.
I think that's what I was getting at.
Yeah, I could feel it. And I've had that happen to me, and I think that. So let's be clear, right? Yes, if you put anything, including a fear, above the living God, that is a form of idolatry. Sure. But it isn't just sort of like unvarnished, straight up like sin. So, for example, I have a choice. Okay, every day I have a choice. Real simple. I can walk down the street, and if I see something that entices me sexually, I have a choice. I can look at it, or I can not look at it. I can pursue it, or I can not pursue it, right? It's not like that. Anxiety is often not like that at all. If I choose to go and visit a prostitute tonight instead of visiting with my wife, right? I don't really think that you can pull a card out and say, well, I was traumatized, therefore this is not an idol issue.
Yes.
Actually, I've put sexuality first. I've worshiped that instead of loving my neighbor as myself. That would be loving my wife, right? Loving God and honoring him. So in my mind, you're absolutely correct that it's very damaging to people when you're reductionistic and you make worry an idol, and then you just tell them, hey, pray about it and repent. Now, does that mean we shouldn't pray and we shouldn't repent? that's not what we're saying, right? Here we're saying not what we're not saying, okay? But it's very interesting that you've had the same experience I've had, and I think a lot of our listeners would have had, which is that
it's a very normal thing. It's not like a, one of a billion. I mean, everybody has this kind of problem, and it's just things that people think about.
Right. Here's another anecdotal one.
Yeah.
Okay. So I want to go back to the idolatry thing and repentance, and we should tease that out. But here's an anecdotal one. Okay. So many people struggle with drinking and alcoholism. Okay. And many people struggle with substance abuse or some form of addiction. Yeah. Right. And typically you will meet people that said, God just totally took it away. Bam. And then what they do is they project that anecdotal experience onto everybody else, and they will often. I know some people that do this quite well in our community. There's one person in particular that did have that experience, and he is quite good at not projecting that onto other people, but using that as a source of encouragement. Like, God can set you free. Not He's gonna set you free like this, and if you don't believe enough in Him,
if you don't pray this prayer,
right,
you don't pray this
right,
prayer, the same words
right,
I'm saying right now, I promise it ain't gonna help you.
Right. So you have this scenario where people use anecdotal or personal experiences about worry, and then they usually, if they're believers, they'll run to certain scripture passages to sort of prop that up, right? And say, don't you see in Philippians 4, you're told to pray about your worry, and the reason why you're not having peace is because you're not praying. And then that's the pressure that they put on people, and they do these, like I said, reductionistic handlings of worry, and I don't think that does anybody any good.
It just creates resentment.
Yeah, and I think, you mentioned resentment. Talk about that. I wouldn't do resentment. I would feel something different, but I'm interested to hear resentment. That's fascinating.
Yeah, I let's say prior to my Christian walk, if I'm let's say here walking around the square, and there's a table of a bunch of people praying over people. And I feel called to be prayed over, so I walk over, and this actually happened too.
Oh, okay.
And I told them a couple of things that I wanted to be prayed for, and they started praying over me, and they're like, God will set you free. Just repeat these words after me, in this way, and then he's like, I need you to shout it like God's not hearing you, and I'm like, and just
interesting.
It was such a phony thing, and it made me feel more like there was something wrong with me more than anything else. Yeah. And, that maybe my description of that, I'm trying to, I guess, be G-rated about it.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So that made you just the snippet that you shared is truly alarming to me. That's concerning on so many levels.
And then they prayed over me that I would have the gift of speaking tongues. And then they said after they were done with the prayer that I could speak in tongues.
And let me guess, it didn't take.
Yeah, I don't have that gift.
Maybe you will, maybe you won't. Some people do, some people don't. That's the way I look at it theologically. I don't want to get into a big battle about that with folks. To me, that's an important issue that we should talk about. But
I feel
but that produced resentment in you.
It did, because one, it made me feel like I didn't belong in that group, and there was a calling inside my heart to go to church at that time.
Right.
And there was a like I felt like God was calling me for something. Yeah. In a way. And I wasn't familiar with that feeling. My previous walk of life is a little bit different than this one. So trying to, figure out what that means, what this feeling is, and then having some phony like that,
pressure you.
Be an actor on the corner of a street. Is this what, in my head, is this what Christianity is? Yeah. And it's like, and it made me angry because it's not what I expected it to be.
Yeah, I think also not only resentment perhaps, but I think a lot of people can feel I'm not sure exactly what the right way is to label it, that they feel out of place in church,
right,
or that they don't feel good enough. So it's like a lot of times our churches project and spiritual people project an image that everything should be just gravy all the time. It should just be just wonderful. And I just don't see that in the life of Christ. I don't see that in the life of the early church. And we're not trying to make a pass for, and I hope to get to eventually in our conversation, areas where worry is in fact sinful and we ought to deal with it as such, because I think it can really hijack you. But I'm glad that we're introducing this on the front end, because I think a lot of people have had experiences where they don't feel like they measure up. They feel depressed.
Yeah.
It sends them away more confused than helped.
If I don't wear these clothes this way, if I don't talk this way, if I don't talk to these people or hang out with these people or do these things, I don't belong in this church.
Right.
And it's like,
and worry is one more piece of that non-belonging.
Worry, and that's the worry right there. And I mean, it can start with something so small as that and grow into something even bigger.
Yeah.
Worry that like you don't even belong at this church, period. And it's like,
yeah. Well, I think there was a number of people, and you mentioned taking medication. I know a number of people, some of my closest friends in the whole world, you being one of them, take medication for anxiety. And this is something that is extremely prevalent in our culture today. I don't think that the purpose of our discussion is to be pro or con on medication, but just acknowledging the fact that anxiety is a huge factor in people's lives.
I'll tell you right now, I'm a con.
A what?
I'm against it.
Oh, a con. I thought you were like, you're a con man. I'm like, whoa, you're faking it.
No.
You're against it.
I am against it.
And that's interesting. I don't know anyone that takes medication that sees it as a wholly positive thing.
It's kind of like a crutch because I can't figure out how to do it by myself.
Wow.
And, I mean, anxiety is such a prevalent thing nowadays.
Yeah.
And I mean, everybody deals with it in some shape or form.
Yeah.
I mean, at the time, I wasn't handling anxiety well because I was in the middle of a horrible breakup, cold turkey smoking after 10 years.
Yeah, that'll mess you up.
And then hopping off of a diet and gaining 100 pounds in 6 months.
And you also, for those in the audience who don't know, you also have had some serious health issues that have been you've been trying to figure that out, and that's caused. I mean, whenever you have health issues, that causes additional stress.
So, at the end of the day, do I agree I should take this medication? No.
Oh, okay.
Does it help? Yes.
Yes. Fascinating.
And for me, I've had that prayer. God, please take this anxiety from me.
Yeah.
Not temporarily.
Right.
Permanently. I can't do it by myself.
Well, a lot of people have found that a lot of people have felt the way you feel, and what they found is that the medication or self-medication. A lot of people take ADHD stimulants. A lot of people take illicit drugs.
Yeah.
A lot of people just over caffeinate the heck out of themselves. Right? Hello. Right? Okay. I might have done that. And so I thought that was just water.
No, this has caffeine.
Oh, that one has caffeine. Good
always,
for you.
Always.
Okay. A little caffeine goes a long way. A lot of caffeine becomes a problem. But so people medicate in the spectrum of areas, and what they find is that the medication works, or the self-medication avenue works, but it has side effects.
When I said it was a crutch, I want to touch on that.
You want to elaborate?
I'm not saying it's a crutch for everyone. It's a crutch for me.
Okay.
I shouldn't have generalized it like that. For me, that's the best way I can put it for myself.
Yeah, so we don't want to have people all these comments, Eli, you jerk.
Good. No, I'm not. I promise I'm not. That's not what I meant. And if you took it that way, I do apologize.
Yeah.
But I meant for myself. That is how I view the medication for me.
Yeah.
But anyway, sorry.
That's fascinating. Yeah, a lot of people feel that the medication ultimately has you have your own version of, it's a negative. They don't want it. Yeah. It's a crutch. It has side effects. I wish that I could just be normal.
Well, there's that. And then the second one is, why do I have to take this in the first place? Why is it so bad that I have to take this medication?
Right.
And it's like, I'm doing the working out. I changed my diet completely. I'm active all the time. I have a job. I have a good house life.
Right.
You know,
you're engaged.
My fiance is amazing. My
she
dogs
is awesome.
Yes,
your
my
dogs are cool.
Why does this exist?
Right.
Where does the problem start? Where was that lightning bolt for me? Where did that start?
Yeah.
And it's like that's a question I constantly have, because in truth there is no reason to have it. Like, there's no reason I should be taking this medication. There's no reason I should be anxious, but I am.
Well, I don't think
it bothers me. As a person, it does.
I think on this channel, right, I don't think I want to deconstruct perhaps your psychology.
Right.
But there were some things that we can say, okay? So one of the things that was tremendously helpful, and it's only helpful from an analysis standpoint and helpful from if you can get out of yourself and look at things, it's not emotionally satisfying, okay, what I'm about to say, but it can be in the long run an analysis helpful insight. So we've all been out in the woods, and if you're in the wintertime, it's easier to see sometimes, but even the spring you can see animal trails. So you can see a little trail, like a deer path in the woods, and the deer make these paths through the woods. And then if you came along and you had, a bunch of horses go through there, it would widen it. And then if you had along and you took some people and they carved it out and put some cinders down, you'd have a nice bike path, right? And then after a while, if you got really serious, you could come in and you could chop down all the trees, you could dig out a foundation and pour, let's just go full tilt, do a concrete 4-lane highway, okay, with walls on the side for can you imagine them, the walls on the side to keep the sound in? Okay. So I don't know where people are in the country, but if you're driving on 80, 90 or 94, here, right, in this area, the greater Chicago area, that's what you're going to see. Okay. When you start with some trauma, or let's say you start with something that concerned you, you can look at it like a little deer path. And then if you continue to build on that, you would build a pattern for your life that before you know it, you have a super highway of Mack truck worrying.
Because you've just blown it
blazing.
Out of proportion.
Here's the thing, not to be grotesque, but if I tried to little old me, tried to step out in front of a Mack truck, a big wheeler going 75 mile an hour on I-94, okay? And I step out in front of it, 100. I'll give him 100 yards, right? He's probably gonna jackknife his best to not hit me and still kill me, right? And then to deconstruct the whole foundation and turn it back into a peaceful forest,
it's impossible. It's not impossible. It's really hard.
It's really hard.
Yeah.
Right. So what ends up happening is you have these people who've developed a super highway of worry. Okay. They have deep psychological channels, and someone comes along oversimplified, reductionistic, and says, as you would say, y'all got to just pray about that. Right? Yes, we do need to pray about it.
You got to work on that a little bit.
Really? Was that terrible?
It wasn't bad. Okay. 6 out of 10.
Thank you.
Close.
Close.
We'll get there.
I'm above 5.
Yeah,
that's good. Thank you.
There.
So, you got to pray about it, right? And I think that we do people a very huge disservice when we talk about worry when you're dealing with someone that has a veritable superhighway. And, they don't like it. And then do you tell them that it's an idol and say that they're worshiping it? Like, an idol is something that you deeply desire. An idol is something that you want. Now, you could go the terrified route. People worshipped Molech and different gods that they were afraid of, right?
Sure.
You could go that route, but I find idolatry such a woefully inadequate reductionistic paradigm that I can't even believe I'm saying it, because I spent years and years and years in graduate school learning about this, and I came out of it going, that ain't going to cut it.
Yeah.
That ain't going to cut it.
It's almost like a blanket.
Yeah, and it causes people to not be able to actually observe the full scope of humanity and our experiences.
Well, being as you say, reductionistic, I think that's what you said. Yeah. It's almost like you're belittling the person in a way, and it's like, someone, I mean, I can't speak for anybody, but like, you know, in my walk,
right,
and, you know, where I am at right now, how I feel internally, you know, in my heart, in my mind, for someone to belittle that, it's detrimental.
Right.
You know, and I mean, it leaves people fragile. And then I think that is where the resentment I was talking about comes from.
Yeah.
And I think, like you said, concern just snowballs into worry, snowballs into anxiety. I mean, you know, frustration snowballs into resentment, you know, it goes on and on. It just creates this, like, this tornado of emotions in someone. Yeah. And it's like, you know what, I'm just not going to go to church that day.
Right. Because I'm frustrated and I resent.
You know, I know what they're going to say. I don't feel like going that day.
Well, let's talk about some constructive things. All right. So we don't want to be over simplistic and reductionistic in our approach to concerns and worries and anxieties. Right. We want to say that on the one hand, we don't want to do that, but on the other, we would admit. So let's just take some really simple teachings of Jesus, okay? Mm-hmm. So in Matthew chapter 6, Jesus says something that is truly profound, okay? He teaches how to pray. And one of the things that he teaches the disciples is you put God first. So everybody, well, not everyone, a lot of people would know the Lord's Prayer. Most people know it in the archaic English, but he just basically says, God, let your name be holy. So hallowed be thy name. Yeah. Our Father who art in heaven. God, you pray, you address God in heaven. God, you're in heaven. May you be glorified. May your name be glorified, right? Give us this day our daily bread. Right? What's that about? Well, in a Middle Eastern culture, you didn't always know that you were going to eat.
Sure.
And there could be famine or there could be problems. And Jesus basically is going to pick up on this concept of the daily bread that you're praying for later on in the teaching. And he's going to basically say, I tell you, don't worry. God clothes the lilies of the field with more beauty than King Solomon had with all of his royal robes, right? God cares for the birds of the air and the animals. Don't you think that he's going to care more about you? And he says, so don't worry about what you're going to eat or what you're going to drink. Don't worry about these things, right? He says the pagans, who are the pagans? The people that don't know God, right? They run after those things. And I think the implication is, what good does it do them, right? And then he says, can you really add 1 hour to your life by worrying? Right? And I don't think that Jesus is doing a mathematical equation here. I don't think he's actually saying something like, do you know that if you smoke a worry cigarette, it will reduce your life by 5 years or 5 days or some arbitrary number? I don't think that's what he's saying. I think he's actually just saying, through illustration, does it actually do you any good?
No.
Does it help you at one? Yes. Not one bit does it help you. So why give your energy to it? And so he says, give your energy to seeking first God's kingdom and his righteousness. And he says, because each day has enough trouble of its own. Mm-hmm. And so I link those two things in my mind. Right. I say, okay, so Jesus tells me to pray about my needs, the things that I'm deeply concerned about. And on the other hand, he says, put your energies towards trusting God and put your energies toward pursuing him, and don't give it too much energy. In fact, don't give it any energy. He doesn't say, this is one of the things that just really kills me, okay, as a pastor. He doesn't say, try not to worry. He doesn't say, it'd be good for you to have a worry reduction plan, right? He says, and I don't think that he's harsh. I don't think that he's saying it with a southern accent. Do you know what I mean? You all got to speak in tongues.
That
right?
was better.
Was it better? All right. So I don't think that he's saying that. I think that he's saying with a great deal of compassion and yet power, like conviction, right? Convicted, truthful speech saying, listen, this is doing you absolutely no good. Don't do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that right there, you know, I feel like that's something that's learned very small over time. And it gets bigger and bigger and bigger.
And I'm so glad you said that. Yeah.
My grandfather, I don't know if I had talked to you about, like, you know, about a year ago or so, he had colon cancer and whatnot, and just
we've discussed a little bit of it.
On here, I believe. Not a second was there worry for him.
Yeah, but see, now your grandpa was the superhighway in the positive.
Yes.
Right? He had all the positive thoughts of seeking first the kingdom of God. He had all the positive thoughts of trusting God, even though he couldn't see the end results.
Right.
He had faith.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
And so he spent just as an aside, have you seen older people and how there's almost like two classes of older people? There's older people that are super crabby, and I'm not talking about because they have Alzheimer's, dementia, or some kind of disorder, or disease, right? I'm just talking about the crabby grandma,
the cynical,
nasty old man, right? It's like you got these trajectories, or you've got the sweet grandma. She's the nicest person in the whole world.
There's no in between.
And you get the most wonderful, pure, holy old man who is like your grandpa, who spent his whole life thinking about like good things, and now he's got a super highway of peace.
Yeah.
How do we get there, right? I think that's the question people want to ask. And honestly, I think the answer is that on a daily basis, you have to begin to recognize the spectrum of worry. And when it starts creeping up on you, you've got to say no to it, and you've got to say yes to giving that over to God. And at the very least, you have to recognize this stinks. I don't like the way this feels. I don't think that this is healthy.
And all you're doing is building a foundation.
Right.
And I think that's what he did. Or a superhighway, as you call it.
Yeah, foundation, it doesn't matter. I mean, whatever works, whatever is functional for you.
When he first started his walk, I'm sure that, worry was much more prevalent. And, he, just years and years and years of knowing the Lord and knowing what he does and praying constantly.
Right.
He's kind of like enhanced his armor in a way.
Yeah.
Where it's like those flaming arrows that we talked about don't really hurt. It's
he's blocking them.
Yeah,
with the shield of faith.
I mean, so
they come, but he's got them. They don't get through.
And I think, dude, from what I gather from it is it's not something that's like that.
Yeah.
And I think that's what people want nowadays. But it's something that is worked towards. And
any of us have known about changing our health is that it doesn't happen overnight.
I wish it did.
Yeah,
I'd be the happiest camper in the world.
Right. So one of the things that I think that would be helpful is to say, okay, well, how do you? So let's take a scenario. Okay, someone finds themselves the opposite of your grandpa. They find themselves with a superhighway of out of control, unstoppable traffic patterns of anxiety and worry. They get up when they can sleep, okay, given the noise of that highway in their head, and then they wake up to that noise in their head, right? And it's impossible for them to express to people how they really feel. They might go to a therapist or something, and the therapist listens to them for a half an hour to an hour and charges them $100 an hour, and then they go home going, "Was this really did this really help my superhighway?"
Yeah.
And so you got someone in this scenario. What can we say to encourage people? I think one of the places that I love to start is not in chastisement or not in like condemning people, but I like to start with 1 Peter, and it says, cast all your cares on him. And I'm going to say care could be an anxiety.
Sure.
Right? Yeah. Cast all your cares on him. I'm messing it up.
Yeah. I mean, you're kind of saying what I would say too.
No, I got to look this up. You cast everything on him because he cares.
Yeah.
I'm going to look it up.
Dun, dun,
yeah.
Dun.
So one of the things we want to do is we want to help give people tools to be able to deal with these concerns, right? And so, cast all your anxieties on him because he cares for you. 1 Peter 5.
Yeah.
Right? So humble yourselves, therefore, under God's mighty hand, so that at the proper time he may exalt you, casting all your anxieties on him because he cares for you. Be sober-minded, be watchful. Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour. Resist him, standing firm in your faith, knowing that the same kind of sufferings are being experienced by your brotherhood throughout all the world. And so, this is talking about the adversary of the devil. This is talking about suffering. But I think that, if you were living in a world where you were facing persecution, if you were living in a world where you were concerned for your life, right? The only positive way that you can handle your psychology is to give all those anxieties to God in prayer. Because if you don't, they're going to run you over like a Mack truck.
Going 75 miles
Going 75 mile an hour. And I think there's so many people that just feel so overwhelmed by their anxieties. And we have to slow down and say, okay, all right, it's a superhighway, right? But what we're going to do is we're going to just start diverting that traffic. We're not going to try to stop it. We're going to divert the traffic, right? So I don't know if you've ever been in Colorado or in the mountains regions. Have you ever been out there, out west, and been on some of the highways?
Nope.
So if you fly into Denver, and for the people who are out west, this will make sense. I think it's I-70. And so I-70 runs from basically the Denver area west through the mountains, and it goes up to a lot of all the resort, the famous ski places up in the mountains, okay? And you have to go up over this giant pass that's like 10,000 feet, all right? And so when you get up,
fun.
Yeah, you get up over this pass, and then when you come down, what you see is along the highway, there are these like off-ramps, and what they are is they're semi-tractor trailer runoffs.
I know what you're talking. It's like dirt paths that go up.
Yeah, and it turns into rocks, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that what we need to start seeing is not as trying to step out and like with our own self-will stop the truck as it's coming down the Colorado Pass, right? I wish I knew what the pass is. I've gone over it several times, but like...
I went to truck school too.
Did you?
To drive so much. I never passed it. I don't have any of my license.
Okay.
I couldn't do the parallel park. But anyway...
So you know what the...
No, I should know. And we even studied it, and I have no idea.
So your brakes go out, right?
Yeah.
And what they do is they send the truck off the highway, off of this runoff ramp to capture it, right? And I think what we need to begin to see is prayer is like our runoff ramp. When we're not going to stop this runaway worry, right? We're not going to step out and say, put on the brakes. You know what I mean? Like, right?
Now I have to figure out what the name of that is.
Go ahead and look it up.
Me absolutely
it's
crazy.
Okay. So one of the things I think we need to be doing is we need to be casting all of our anxiety on God because He cares for us. He's provided an avenue for us to be able to deal with those anxieties. And I think one of the big problems is that we don't take the off-ramp. We just let it ride, right? We just totally let it ride. And that is completely unhelpful. I'm going to buy more time. You want me to keep going?
It's called truck escape ramps. So we were close, but
truck escape ramps.
I don't think that's what I learned. That doesn't ring a bell for me. But yeah, okay, I mean it.
I've actually watched. I've never actually physically seen it in real life, but
either.
After I went through those highways in Colorado, I looked it up on YouTube, and there are videos of trucks just plowing through. Stopping in the rocks or gravel or whatever they've got up in there.
Whenever you drive down to North Carolina, you take that turnpike. It's like West Virginia, stuff like that. It's like 270 miles long. It's crazy, but every 100 yards there's a ramp.
Oh, they have them there too.
Yeah, and it's when you look up and you see how high they are, it's just it's scary to think about. But I mean. They are there to save your life, so that way you're not flying down the road in a semi-truck. But
that's right.
I mean,
so I think that we need.
I like how you put that because we don't need. There's no way you can stop that semi-truck standing in front of it.
No.
And
no.
So the rediversion,
right?
The transfer of gravity and inertia and everything else, taking it, almost taking the pressure away in a sense.
Well, I love I love about the First Peter passage is it tells you why.
Right.
Because He cares.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Not because He's saying, you bad person, you shouldn't be anxious. You worshipped an idol of fear.
Right.
Right. okay, so you haven't, I'll give it to you. You can have it. Mm-hmm. Let's give it to him. It's an idol. Yep. Fine, let's call it an idol. I'm just for instance. Mm-hmm. It could be, right? Most of the time I think it's not actually. But it could be, right? He still doesn't say that. He says, redirect your anxieties to me. Cast them on me. I'll be the runoff ramp. I'll take it, right? And then if you go back to what we were talking about earlier in Philippians chapter 4, right? Again, Philippians chapter 4 can be something that can be used as a club. You can beat people over the head with it. You can say, don't be anxious about anything. Darn it. Mm-hmm. Right? No. He's trying to encourage the Philippians to have the runoff ramp mentality. He's saying, listen, you're going to worry. And Paul knows all about it, right? We are coming full circle. He is a person that has clearly articulated his anxiety on more than one occasion in writing.
Yep.
Okay? And so he's saying, yeah, we're going to worry, but what are we going to do with that worry? Well, we're going to bring it to God.
That kind of goes parallel with my life motto.
Okay, what's that?
I think I've told you this before, but it goes, pain is inevitable.
Oh, but suffering is optional?
Suffering is optional.
Yeah, I have a hard time with this because the Bible talks all about suffering, but I think, and that it actually happens, but I think what you're talking about is allowing that pain to control you in such a way that it dominates you. Right.
And the optional part is the prayer. You know, I mean, ultimately all my problems are solved through God. There's no, I mean, I can't do anything by myself, in all honesty.
Right.
So,
but you can even just hear how you're saying that. Mm-hmm. There's nothing, you would never take that truth that you are deeply aware of and sort of use that as some kind of reductionistic club against you. You would say to a person, you would offer it as a vehicle of hope.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so I think people need hope in the face of their anxieties. They need to know that, number one, God cares, and they need to know that the community that is full of His Spirit cares, and that we care about how they feel, and we don't want them to be wrestling with anxiety and worry. And I, you've talked about how you're that. Honestly, I've had people say to me all the time, you're so worried about blah, blah, blah. It's because I feel a huge sense of responsibility in order to deal with some of these things, It's like a mother or a father, they want to do the best for their family or for their child or for their spouse, And you can turn anything into something incredibly pathological and negative. And, I guess some people think that I cross the line upon occasion. But for me, I'm just being candid and transparent about the fact that there are concerns and worries and maybe even anxieties in my life. And so that causes me as a shepherd or a teacher to really care with a sense of compassion and not being over reductionistic to such a way that would create resentment or depression or people giving up and loss of hope. No, I want the opposite. I want people to be encouraged. I want people to be engaged. I want people to have hope. And so we're talking about, how are we going to handle our anxieties? Well, we have to handle them with prayer and thanksgiving. And I think the Thanksgiving bit is hard for people. They say Thanksgiving. So what does that have to do with? Well, I can just never forget there have been a number of circumstances in my life where there was a gaping hole of need, just huge. And it was going to be a game ender. Not a game changer, a game ender. It was game over if that was not resolved. Yeah. And I had mature Christian people come to me and say, all right, we're going to pray about this. We are not going to let this destroy us psychologically and emotionally. We're going to pray about it, and we're going to thank God in advance for what He's going to do. And we're just going to give it to Him.
That's what Alan, he says it a lot. I mean,
Alan's the expert at this.
He's
always, the best at this.
When he prays, he always says, I thank you in advance. That's his thing. And, I mean, it's makes me want to adapt that. And it's
and for those people who don't know Alan,
I want to adopt that.
Alan is not doing this in any kind of overly simplistic or flippant sense.
Yeah.
And he's not doing it in any of this kind of name it and claim it avenues where if he just says it with sincere faith that he thinks it's somehow going to magically happen. No, he is going, from the best I can understand him, he is taking a number of different avenues that he has learned in his life and experience and in Scripture that basically show him that if God knows you need it, he's going to handle it. Yeah. And you just need to trust him with that and thank him in advance. So like my kids, they can thank me in advance for dinner. Okay? It's going to happen. Yeah. I am going to feed them.
Is it though?
Oh, it is. Right? But even still, I mean, I like your response even. Like, I can't guarantee that. Yeah. Right? But it is like 99% repeating. Sure. Right? 0.9 repeating. So, like, and think about God. God actually knows what we need even before we ask him.
That's interesting you say that. So when I started my walk, I know I'm not the only person on earth who's had this question in my head.
Sure.
I almost kind of like flip-flop it in a way. And I'm curious what your answer is of this question. Does God allow anxiety as an opportunity to pray?
I think that the answer would have to be yes.
Yeah, that's what I think so too.
And does God does he force anxiety on us?
No,
but he will. I think that we could reframe it in a way that would make theologians happy, comfortable. That he allows things like anxiety to happen in our life, so that he can grow us and teach us. Yeah. God is always in the business of working all things out for those who love him and are called according to his purpose for their good. Yeah. Right. And one of the things that just has been remarkably an avenue that God has grown me is that I've had to come to this conclusion that the life that I have now is the best life that I can have. Not like Joel Osteen style, right? But that there
tell me you don't want the Lamborghini?
Nope. No, just be a pain in the rear. I'd like to drive one time, but it would be a pain.
Same, yeah. Yeah. Actually, I probably shouldn't drive one. But
really?
I like to play a little too much.
Okay, well, we can talk about that another time. But so it's like God has brought all kinds of things into my life that I would say that can't be the best part of my life. Why would we have to do that? Or why couldn't we do this?
Yeah.
Right? You know, one of the things that we had been talking about is one of my favorite heroes, Corrie ten Boom, and how she was this Dutch woman during World War II, and her father, her brother, and her sister and herself were all put into concentration camps because they had hid Jews in their home and in their business in the Netherlands. And so many times her sister, Corrie, was actually kind of feisty. Okay. And she was so angry about being put into a concentration camp. And then she said, then we had lice. They had lice. Yeah. And they were so mad about having lice. Mm-hmm. And then her sister said to him, Corey, don't you understand that like God sent the lice so that the Nazi prison guards won't come in, and we can have prayer, Bible study, we can play games, we can have fellowship. And Corey was just like, dude, she was not having it at first, like not at all. But she came to realize that God orchestrated all the things in her life in order to really grow her. And he allowed these terrible, terrible things to happen to her in order to grow her and to have her have a more enhanced experience with God. And that's just something
he knew that she would come out the other side.
Yeah.
Because suffering to her it was optional.
Well, and it wasn't a neat and clean story. So, for example, Corey's sister died. Yeah. Her dad and her brother never saw them again. Right? So it's not like I love her story because it's not like one of these like overly, simplified stories where it's okay, everything's going to be awesome. It's like the end of Job, you know what I mean? Everyone's like, well, Job got so much richer and so much more family than he ever had before. He was awesome. He was like the biggest dude ever. Come on, it was worth it. And I'd be like, yeah, he still lost all his kids. Yeah. I don't know about his relationship with his wife. I mean, he said that he was repugnant to his wife, and his wife basically said, listen, curse God and die. That's not cool. Right. So we don't want to reduce and just sort of ignore these very difficult things. But in that vein, God absolutely allows things to happen in our life so that we can trust him more. And he will, in the eternal perspective, work all things out for the good of those who love him and are called according to his purpose. That daily needs runoff ramps of prayer for me to be able to seize and live with.
And I think part of the reason that we still have some time, I can kind of venture into this for my people that might have some of these same thoughts.
Right.
I think the whole idea of Christianity itself made me laugh at some points, because it's like, why would you want to follow a God that allows these kind of things? And and like, way to stay optimistic about something that's so terrible.
Right.
It's like, and for a long time, I couldn't get out of that thought path. And I feel like there was just a change of heart. And I feel like God answered a lot of those questions for me in a way, because I was like, I don't want to follow a God that allows lice so that way they can pray. Like, they're just like, it's strange at first when you think about it. And I think that's why a lot of people are turned away from church and in general, is because they look at God in that kind of light.
Sure.
But, and it hurts me internally when I see like dudes on the corner praying over people that they get the gift of tongues just for praying with them.
Right.
And it's like, that's not the God that I know. And it's like, how do I even explain the God that I know to people? The God that changed my heart from, just utterly despising him to loving him forever. And it's such a...
I think the answer...
Yeah. Do you know where I'm going with that?
Oh, absolutely. I one of the things that was truly sort of challenging for me is to listen to the late Christopher Hitchens. You know Christopher Hitchens?
I don't.
Okay. British guy.
Is it a good or bad thing that I don't?
It's neither good nor bad. Okay. So the long story short is that Christopher Hitchens wrote for Vanity Fair. He was a political analyst, think tank kind of guy in the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s. I think even he eventually passed away and died. His brother became a very strong Christian, and Christopher Hitchens, after 9/11, became absolutely obsessed with atheism. Mm-hmm. And he basically said the major moral problem in the world isn't what religious people say. The major moral problem in the world is that there are these religious people that are obsessed with an end times judgment and are obsessed with a God that's going to judge people. And he says these people are horrible. And he says, and he wrote a book, and I believe it's something like Why God Isn't Great or Good or something like that, Why God's Not Great. And then he would argue Christians. He would argue, and he's an extremely intelligent guy. A lot of times he was drunk, and I think that didn't help. He drank very heavily, but he was super articulate. And he would basically say, why do you want to believe in a God that allows the extinction of people? Why do you want to believe in a God where most people die? And he would give grotesque examples like people die because all their teeth fall out and then they can't eat and they die of starvation. He's like, so many people have died from starvation. So many people have died for disease. Like, you believe in a God that did that? And he always makes category errors in my mind. Like, that's the answer to him, right? Philosophically, you're making a category error. You're making definite assumptions about God and about his people. And then you're drawing conclusions on the basis of your limited frame set. And you're saying, therefore, I can't believe in a God like that. And therefore, God can't exist. Right. Like, I think both of those conclusions are understandable, but they're completely wrong-headed. All right. The best answer to this is not to try to sort of argue why evil is okay, or why a good, loving and all-powerful God can exist and evil can exist simultaneously. Right. I find that argument, you can just spin your wheels forever on that, right? The best answer that I've ever been given is that God stepped in and he took the pain of evil and he died for us. See, without the cross of Christ, then you might actually have that discussion. But as soon as you say, no, God made the world, he got engaged in the world, and he took on the problems of the world. And they are not his. He did not make them, but he did care about it, and he does love us, and he will solve them. And there is a solution to all of this, right? So from a big frame picture, I can say at some level I'm okay with evil because God got involved, right? And then the other thing, and this is very heady, and I don't want to like blow people's doors off, but a lot of the things that I've been looking at recently have to do with, and just brace yourself, multidimensionals, okay? Reality is not what we think it is, okay? So, for example, scientists think that there's possibly 11 different dimensions.
Scientists believe a lot of things.
Yeah, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about it may very well be true that there are multiple dimensions, right? And one of the best illustrations that I've ever seen is, and if this doesn't help people, that's fine, but we all know the difference between two-dimensional and three-dimensional. We live in a three-dimensional world, okay? But if you have multi-dimensions, then you can understand for just a second how something might appear to be a certain way because you're looking at it through the framework of your limited dimensional framework and viewpoint. So if you were 2D, if you were a 2D person and you entered into a sphere, okay, into 2D, it would look like a dot that would grow into a circle that would grow back into a dot again as the 3D passed through your plane, your one-dimensional plane, right? Yep. Well, if you had 4D and 5D and 6D and 7D and 11D, right? Right? If you have multi-dimensional realities, right? And God can occupy all of them, and he comes in and he interfaces with us, and we're so angry because God is like, to us, he's more than just his actuality is more than a sphere, right? It's so much bigger than that, but that's just us starting to get at where he might be. And all we're seeing a dot, and we're like, God, I'm so mad at you. Like, why you're just a dot? Like and God is basically saying, listen, I'm going to come into your world. I'm going to appear to be a dot to you, but I'm so much bigger. And if you could understand all my dimensions and everything that I know, the infinite abilities that I have, then it would ultimately make sense to you. But at this point, you're so 2D. And God's not 3D, 4D. He's infinite D. Right? And when I finally got my head around that, it is not always emotionally satisfying, but for me, it's intellectually satisfying. That yes, I don't know. I am not the kind of being that knows these things, nor is Christopher Hitchens.
Right.
Or any of the other apologists that he argues with, right? So one of the things that we're way off topic about worry, but one of the things that we have to realize is that we worry about all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
And that God is so much bigger than that. He's so much bigger than that. And we've got to get that runoff ramp and say, God, I'm going to give this to you. I'm going to trust you. I'm going to seek you first. I'm going to go at it that way, and I'm not going to let it destroy me. And that cannot happen in one fell swoop. It happens in incremental building phases where ultimately we develop that superhighway, not of fear and worry, but of trust in God. And, we could go in more of the multidimensional stuff in other podcasts, but like this is something that I'm keenly interested in scientifically and psychologically, because I think it actually offers a tremendous amount of insight into what believing in an infinite God actually means. So maybe we'll put a bookmark it there. Okay?
Yeah.
All right.
Well, I got my brain turning. I got more questions, but
okay,
we don't have enough time.
When later, I'll draw pictures for us. Well, look, everyone, thanks for tuning in to the Bridgepoint Podcast. Hey, if you have questions, comments, leave them in the comments section for us. We love to read all those comments. Thanks for the people all over the country. I had a guy reach out from Portland, Oregon this week who's listening to our podcast. What? Yes, super cool. So wherever you are, go ahead and leave the comments. Get in touch with us at Bridgepoint Church. We'd love to hear from you. If you have any questions, put them in there. And as always, please like and share if you enjoyed this content. And as always, keep your eyes on Jesus and let's follow him together.